So we are not finished with the political side of the Great Salt Lake issue. We're very pleased to have with us this morning, following the governor, but also assuming a leadership role himself as the Speaker of the Utah House. And that is Brad Wilson. He's represented Utah's 5th House District for over a decade. He currently serves as the Speaker. It's a position he's held since 2019. During his service in the legislature, he's championed policies to make Utah one of the strongest, best managed, and most business-friendly states. As Utah has faced prolonged drought, Speaker Wilson has championed the effort to protect Utah's natural infrastructure by preserving and restoring the Great Salt Lake. Under his leadership, the House has advanced policies to conserve, preserve, and optimize Utah's water supply. When he's not in the House, Speaker Wilson can be found hiking in the mountains with his family or on their boat. And he lives in Kaysville, and we're very pleased to have the Speaker with us today. Speaker Wilson, thank you for joining us.
Hey, good morning. It's great to be with you all today. And this is a high-tech operation we've got going here, and they needed some time to get it set up, I guess. But my name is Brad Wilson, and as was said, I'm the Speaker of the House. And let me first of all say, I know this isn't really a law school event, at least I don't think it is, but it's kind of wistful for me to be speaking in this building in the law school. My father, who passed away about 11 years ago, went to law school here at the University of Utah. And I'll talk about it in a minute, but a lot of my memories growing up were with my dad out, about, and in and around the Great Salt Lake. So it's kind of an interesting opportunity for me to be with you today. Let's get started. So extending well above 200 feet in the air and about 15 feet in diameter are the sequoia trees in California. And I think we all know that these are some of the tallest and the biggest and the most famous trees, and I would add beautiful trees in the world. And I think a lot of us would think that trees that are this huge would have this incredibly deep root system that go down deep, deep into the ground. But in fact, that is actually not the case. Sequoia trees are rooted relatively shallow, and they're buried no deeper than about 10 feet into the ground. And what's even more remarkable than that is that these trees over centuries have withstood earthquakes and floods and super strong winds and fires, of course, and other natural disasters. And they very, very rarely ever fall down. So you might say, well, how in the world could that be possible? Something that a single tree can weigh up to 500 tons and reach hundreds of feet into the sky. And we all know these trees live for centuries, right? They've been around a long, long time. And how can they do that with their roots only going at most 10 feet into the ground? Well, what's interesting is these amazing sequoia trees have an interconnected root system. These trees literally hold each other up by growing close together and intertwining their roots with one another. And what that means is only redwood trees have the ability to help and support other redwood trees. Similar to that is Utah's really vast and remarkable and complex intertwined water system. So I grew up in Kaysville and Layton, Most of my time was actually spent growing up in Layton. And I lived about a block away from a street called Antelope Drive, named after Antelope Island, because it goes straight down into the Great Salt Lake and into Antelope Island. And I already mentioned this, but growing up, we would spend a lot of time out on Antelope Island. I think we were one of those really weird Utah families that actually spent time playing in the Great Salt Lake. And spent a lot of time out there. And I have really fond memories of being with my dad and my family. And now today I live in Kaysville. And every time I go home, every night, I drop off of a bluff out to get out to West Kaysville. And I can see what's left of the Great Salt Lake. And it's not as big as it used to be. A few years ago, about 2.5 years ago, actually, I was going for I'm not really a runner anymore, I'm more of a jogger, but I was going for a jog up on the east bench of Kaysville, listening to some podcasts, and came across a podcast that started speaking about the Great Salt Lake, and was really startled with what I heard that morning. And this podcast talked about the shrinking Great Salt Lake and the potential risks and downfalls that as a state we needed to be mindful of. And as I literally looked into the distance at Antelope Island and the small amount of water that still surrounds it, I recognized that I'd taken for granted that the lake had always been there and always would be. And it really became clear to me how dire the situation was for our state and for this lake that I actually really, really love. So to make a long story short, I got on the phone, called my chief of staff, talked to my team, and called some of the water experts that I knew and got their perspective. And we seriously started to dive into this issue. And I've learned several things over the last few years about this, but I will tell you one lesson really stands out to me. As we have worked to protect and preserve and save the Great Salt Lake, it has become clear to me that the Great Salt Lake is a symbol of a much broader and more systematic problem and challenge we have with the way we manage our water collectively in the state of Utah. And the Great Salt Lake, it's a big piece, but it's only a piece of a much larger water puzzle related to the Great Salt Lake. So you remember those sequoia trees in the redwood forest? I would imagine that their root system looks very similar to something like what you see up here. As you can see, all the reservoirs and the structures and the lakes and the creeks that run throughout our state, it's pretty remarkable. And if you really look at that map, if you can see it, I think you can, you'll notice that there's not a single source of water that is truly independent. Everything on that map is connected to something, whether it's another river or reservoir or tunnel or aqueduct or stream or something like that. And what this means for all of us is the Great Salt Lake is, and the challenge we have with the Great Salt Lake is not just a Great Salt Lake problem. It's not just a Wasatch Front problem, and it's not something for just northern Utah to be concerned about or to solve. So as such, we think about this, addressing the Great Salt Lake is a statewide effort. It's a statewide task. And our best efforts and our commitment and innovation and sacrifice to save the Great Salt Lake is actually needed for the greater needs of the state of Utah. As we know, I think we all know, the Great Salt Lake hit a record low just 6 months ago. Thanks to a wet winter, which the governor did a nice job talking about. And let me just pause by saying, we get the governor's budget recommendations every fall. And governors like to think they manage the state budget, but actually the legislature does. But the governor gave us his budget recommendations, and he was talking to me and he said, Speaker, I put $5 million in the state budget for flood mitigation. And I'm like, have you lost your mind? And lo and behold, he was prophetic, and here we are. And the only problem we have is we probably should have put $50 million in the budget for flood mitigation this year. But thanks to this really great state wet winter, the statewide conservation efforts as well. The lake has risen a couple feet in a relatively short period of time from the low that we had last November, and we can expect that this trend in a significant way is going to continue upward as snow melt and runoff make its way to the Great Salt Lake. Though this is great news, we are still, and we will always be, one of the driest states in the nation. And we've got many people that are really aware that working on this problem is something that has been long past due, actually, and something that many people have worked on long before I started paying attention to it. And I am very, very grateful to those individuals that have. I'm equally grateful to the work that my colleagues in the legislature have done. They've come light years in a very short period of time in a bipartisan way to be thoughtful and mindful about the things that we need to do to have a commitment to the lake. And while I wish we weren't facing a drying lake, working on this issue has actually been a breath of fresh air. And what I mean by that is, in today's world of politics, it is a time of divisiveness, it's a time of disagreement, but in this case, everybody in the state is working towards a common goal. And we are interconnected with this same objective of saving the Great Salt Lake, and at the same time, bettering Utah's water system in general. Between the session in 2022 and the session we just concluded a few weeks ago, we have done more for Utah's water and to protect and preserve the Great Salt Lake than ever before in the history of our great state. So I want to take a quick look at some of those things that we have done, just to give you a sense of that. The first thing is, last year we invested $50 million in agricultural optimization so that our agriculture community can use less water and still get the great outcomes that they do. And this turns out to be probably our best return on investment in terms of taxpayer dollars. For every $1 that the taxpayer invests in this, the private sector, our agriculture community, puts $4 in. Let me just show you a quick video about this. So, am I supposed to? I don't see a button I'm supposed to push here. So,
there should be like a play button.
There's not a play button. Oh, there's a play button.
Ooh, I wouldn't have found it either.
It is not working. I don't think my videos are going to work. It doesn't look like. So, well, I will do this by song. I will sing what this video was supposed to tell you. But what you would see in this is we've got a number of innovative projects and farmers and ranchers across the state. They're implementing this agricultural optimization technology where for a lot less water, they can get better outcomes in their farms and then there's less water that is used. We think on average, the implementation of agricultural optimization reduces our agriculture consumption by about 30%. So this last session that just concluded recently, we built upon that $50 million from last year and put another $200 million into agricultural optimization to expand the program that our Department of Agriculture and Food executes through grants requiring the agriculture community to implement these irrigation efficiency projects. I'll add to that local ordinances, our cities and our counties across the state also play a really important role in determining how much water we actually use. And my guess is the next video is not going to work either, but I will give it a try. Let's see if this works. This is...
So I can speak on behalf of Layton City.
Turn up the
We've done
volume.
several different things. We've changed our landscaping ordinance. We've added an app for our citizens to be able to see how much water consumption they've been using. We've got a GSI system to help our citizens understand their own vegetation and the different soils that they're trying to water and keep hydrated, as well as we've been working with Rocky Mountain Power on the pumps that we use within our aquifer and being able to get the water up so we can get it to our citizens. But the biggest thing that I am most proud about is our citizens. We've been able to inform them and educate them on all the different opportunities that we need them to do to step up to help conserve water.
So that was Mayor Joy Petro from Layton, actually my hometown, talking about the great work that Layton City has done, implementing new requirements for development across their city that are dramatically reducing the amount of water that growth in the state and their city is requiring. So this last year, not this session that just ended, but a year ago, the state legislature allocated over the last year, $250 million of funding to help install secondary water meters across the state so that each house, each neighborhood has a really good idea and clear understanding of how much water they're using and what they can do in terms of their part to help reduce water consumption. And again, we see whenever these meters get installed, consumption goes down by about 30%, so a significant amount. Let's take a look and see how these meters have helped make a difference.
HB 242 that was passed last year was a great boost to the entire secondary metering project statewide. It allowed for $250 million of funding to go towards secondary metering, which was a lot of small irrigation companies just really couldn't afford to take that step. We've seen a lot of support from a lot of the customers and customer agencies in providing those secondary meters. So it benefits really conservation as a whole, and it allows people to understand how they actually use water and to be accountable for the water that they do use.
So in addition to the $250 million we already put away in this, we put another $20 million into this program this year to kind of get a few other places across the finish line. And what's been really heartening about this is actually the implementation of the secondary water metering has happened much faster than we thought it might. So every effort to conserve water across the Wasatch Front is going to make a difference in terms of the lake. Water banking, which you've heard a little bit about, is a really creative and innovative solution that allows Utahns to use and share our precious water resources. I want to just show you a quick segment about how water banking is working across the state.
These are huge steps, generational type steps. But everybody knows that that's just the beginning, and we need to do more and more because it's just going to take a real big effort from a lot of people working together. It's hard to think of any long-term solution for Great Salt Lake that doesn't involve water banking. Water banking is an innovation that really allows us to share this precious resource of water. When you think about how a bank works, if you have money that you can get by without, you can put it into the bank, you get paid for it, and somebody else uses it. It's really the same idea when it comes to water. So if somebody can get by without a water right, or they can get by with less water, they can put it into the bank, and then other people can come and lease that water back out of the bank. So it's a great way to take this scarce resource that we have and to spread it out so that more people can use it. I think in the last few years, the real advances have been just testing this proof of concept. So we've put it under the ground. We're actually deploying water banks in different parts of the state. And so we're learning what works and what doesn't work and how we can make the system work even better.
So a lot of great things that are underway right now to help us conserve water. Over the last few years, it's become really obvious and clear to me, though, that we haven't really had the right system to look at and strategically manage the Great Salt Lake. I was driving home from the Capitol one night, probably mid to late December, and I get a lot of calls about the Great Salt Lake. I've done 2 Great Salt Lake summits, and whenever anyone has an idea about how to save the Great Salt Lake, somehow they end up on a phone call with me. And as Speaker of the House, I have spent more time on this singular issue than anything else over the last couple of years. But there's other parts of my job as well, and I'm not an expert on water. And I started thinking that what we really lack as a state around the Great Salt Lake is someone that owns the strategy and the execution of that strategy. And so I called the Capitol and said, let's do something about that. And over the last session, we did make a big difference. And the governor actually talked about this, but maybe before I get to that, I'm actually getting my videos out of order. Last year, we also ran a bill creating a water trust. And as Speaker, I don't run very many bills, but this is a bill that I ran that creates a trust that we partner with the Nature Conservancy and the Audubon Society to help manage the lake. And so let me, do I have a video? I don't have a video about that. I'm completely out of order here. No, I do have a video about that. So I think it says it's, do I have a video about this? Okay. It says play. So, okay, well, there we go. So we partner with the Audubon Society, and they're implementing that trust. You probably heard about the great work that our federal delegation is doing. Senator Romney and Representative Moore in particular have been sort of the tip of the spear at leading some efforts back in Washington, D.C. around helping support the efforts here we have in our state. But Senator Lee, Senator Curtis, Representative Curtis, Representative Owens, and Representative Stewart have also been very helpful. At the end of last year, President Biden signed into law the Great Salt Lake Recovery Act, sponsored by Senator Romney, which is going to study the historic drought conditions and help determine how to protect the long-term needs of the Great Salt Lake. And he also signed into law the Saline Lake Ecosystem, which was sponsored by Representative Moore, which is going to help facilitate the assessment of not just the Great Salt Lake, but some other saline lake ecosystems across the West in particular. And these efforts are additive and have been very helpful to what we have going on here. This legislative session, we sat down and created a strategy for water in the Great Salt Lake. And there were 4 elements that were our priorities for the work that we just concluded. The first was to increase water capacity. The second was to expand conservation efforts across the state. Third was to prepare for the future water needs for our kids and grandkids. And lastly, how do we enhance the outreach efforts so everyday Utahns understand the role that they play and can make a difference? And I'm proud to report that these objectives that we had a lot of intention around, we made significant progress in all 4 of them. Let me just highlight a few pieces of legislation that I think were very impactful to the health and the success of the lake and Utah's water system in general. And now I can tell you about the bill that I was talking about a minute ago. Representative Mike Schultz, the majority leader in the House, ran a bill called the Amendments to the Great Salt Lake. And under this bill, we allocated $10 million one time and $2.5 million ongoing to stand up the office of the Great Salt Lake Commissioner. The governor did a great job of explaining to you the reasons and the benefits of this particular bill. But I believe this singular action of having clarity of mission and clarity on who owns the execution of that may be the most consequential thing we did this session in terms of the long-term impact of the state. We've got amazing work being done by a dozen different state agencies that all touch and impact the lake. This will increase the collaboration and the coordination between all of those different offices. So secondly, we passed a bill, House Bill 513, Great Salt Lake Amendments. We all hear about the production of minerals from the Great Salt Lake and the mining of things from the Great Salt Lake. Lithium is something that we're on the forefront of right now. And House Bill 513 says that as the production of lithium from the Great Salt Lake occurs, we will ensure that a healthy amount of royalties will come to the lake, and that money will be reinvested in preserving the lake, protecting the lake, and also managing the water quality of the lake. And it also says that if there is any use of water in the mining of lithium, that needs to be a net impact of zero over time. And so a very, very important piece of legislation. Indirect to the Great Salt Lake, but impactful to not just our lake up here on the Wasatch Front, the Great Salt Lake, but water needs statewide, are some additional policies that are going to have a positive impact on the Great Salt Lake. And we've, over the last 2 years, passed dozens of bills that will have an impact there, that will increase water capacity and will also increase conservation. Let me just run through a few of those really quickly. House Bill 307, Utah Waterways. This was creates a public-private partnership aimed at promoting for Utah individuals and businesses ways that they can conserve water and optimally use water resources across the state. We've received on the private side commitments from a handful of private businesses and some nonprofits you may be hearing more about. That's not my news to announce, but some other nonprofits will be contributing to this public-private partnership to just help everyone in Utah have clarity what we can do as individuals. Senate Bill 53, sponsored by Representative Vickers and Senator Carl Albrecht, changes the way we will use and think about underground aquifers across the state, ensuring that underground water storage is a bigger part of our strategy related to water moving forward, so that we can capture and use more water in years of plenty. Senate Bill 119 basically puts us on a level playing field. All the states around us that surround us calculate the way they use water differently than the way we use water. So it will change the way that we calculate our consumption to look just like the way Nevada calculates it, Arizona calculates it, et cetera. House Bill 450, and the reason that's important is it will actually help us draw down federal funds to manage our water needs in the future. And lastly, House Bill 450, sponsored by Representative Wilcox, it's going to make it basically easier to implement water-wise landscaping as we develop our state without unnecessary red tape. This year, we invested of taxpayer dollars here in the state of Utah over $500 million towards water. And I know this is an eye test and you can't really see that, but it gives you a sense of all of the work collectively around water. And the majority of these things you see up there will have a direct impact and benefit to the Great Salt Lake. Over $1 billion in the last 2 years dedicated to water and primarily to the Great Salt Lake in one form or fashion. I know you know, but about some news that happened earlier this week. There's some awesome things about my job. And one of the awesome things is you get to really see the character of organizations and people in our state. And I got a call one day from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, unsolicited. I've actually had a couple calls from them. What can we do to help with the lake? I didn't call them, they called me. And we've had a number of conversations, and unsolicited, they made the decision to donate 20,000 acre feet to the lake, which I'm sure you've heard about. But just to put that in perspective, that is 6.5 billion gallons of water a year on a permanent basis that will be flowing into the lake that hasn't been in the past. And we've got other organizations, private organizations, that have water that are contemplating similar contributions to the lake. This, from at least my memory, is the biggest single donation of water to the lake, and super grateful, beyond grateful for the church's contribution and willingness to proactively step up and do that. I've said it before, but this is absolutely a team effort. Government cannot solve this problem on its own. Scientists and researchers cannot solve the problem with the Great Salt Lake on its own. And private businesses and organizations also can't do it on its own. Saving the Great Salt Lake and securing a better water future for Utah is going to take everybody's best efforts in this room and across the state of Utah. Let me be clear. To echo what the governor just said, one wet winter is not going to wipe away 2 decades of drought. Just because we've received significant moisture this season does not mean we're going to take the foot off the pedal in terms of conservation efforts. From my perspective, the battle has just begun. If we don't conserve water in years of plenty like this, our efforts are going to go nowhere. This year is more important in many ways than any year in recent memory. And this includes everyone. We need individuals, businesses, water districts, different organizations, and individuals to all help us take advantage of this year of plenty. If we're smart, if we work together, and if we listen to one another, I am confident that we can both grow and we can protect the amazing natural resources of our state. I think it's been made abundantly clear this morning that saving the Great Salt Lake and implementing greater water conservation efforts statewide is both no small task, and it's not something that anyone can do alone. This is a marathon, not a sprint. This is going to take a decade at least of concerted effort like we've had the last 2 years to save the Great Salt Lake. We saw at the beginning that Utah's water system is interconnected, and as such, every effort we make as a state of increasing our water capacity and expanding water conservation impacts the Great Salt Lake. Together, I know that regardless of political party or whether you're a native Utahn or someone that just moved here, we can conserve our great natural resources and water in this state and reverse the course of the Great Salt Lake and ensure that the Great Salt Lake and Utah's water supply remains strong for my kids and grandkids and their kids. Thank you for having me.
We've got time for one question. One of the questions that got some considerable interest was what assures, given these agricultural optimization efforts, what assures that water will end up reaching the Great Salt Lake? And is the legislature taking steps to ensure that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, we are going to see a massive amount of water produced, if you want to call it that, from these conservation efforts. And water law is complicated and tricky, but we have amazing partners in our water districts, and we're working with them on a regular basis to ensure that water will get to the Great Salt Lake. I'll give you an example. Even before our agricultural optimization program had any real implementation, I called the water districts last fall and said, we need more water. And they sent 30,000 acre feet down last fall without these conservation efforts being implemented. And so I am confident it's in their best interest to work with us on this. And we've got really great partners. So thank you. I really appreciate all of you. I'm sorry, I wish I could stay with you longer. This is more fun than where I'm going. So have a great day.